Hello, welcome to Mystery Science. Today we're going to carry on with our Earth and Atmosphere series. And once again, I'm going to point out that this is primarily aimed at students in my college. They are working through booklets that we've given them, but this is open to everyone and anyone can work their way through if they want to. Each slide where I ask you to do a task, you can copy out the tables or the work that's on the screen and do it for yourself and then mark your answers. Today we're going to be looking at the carbon cycle. And this is one of the most important cycles that we can look at. Carbon is the building block of all life. It is essentially the Lego brick element for anything that is organic and or alive. So today we're going to look at what the carbon cycle is, how to describe it, and we're going to have a look at all of the processes that fit into the carbon cycle. And those are principally respiration, photosynthesis, decomposition, and combustion. All of these cool things, all in the one video. Awesome. Right then, so the first thing I'd like you to do, pause the video and do these do now things, please. Name the 3 types of rocks and what is the difference between lava and magma. If you don't know the answers to these, then have a look previously in the playlist where I do the rock cycle. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what is carbon? What is this carbon stuff of which you speak? Well, if you look at the periodic table, you'll see that it is an element and it sits on the side of the non-metals. It's a non-metallic element. It is the 6th element on the table and it sits in group 4. Now, those of you that have learned about the periodic table and the way that it's structured will know then that it can bond with 4 different things. It can make 4 bonds for each carbon atom. Now, that makes it really versatile. That makes it like the standard Lego brick that can just be used in so many different models. And carbon is no exception. In fact, the number of molecules which involve carbon, there's just trillions of them. And that is why it's so important. It's the backbone of the biological molecules. Without carbon, just won't support life. So we could possibly use silicon because that's also got 4 bonds. It's also in group 4. And some science fiction writers will talk about silicon-based life, but that's not been proven. It's not been found. So carbon is the one. Without carbon, we just wouldn't be alive. You can find carbon in the atmosphere, and it's present in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Now, this is important. This means that as you breathe in, not only are you breathing in oxygen and nitrogen, but you're also breathing in carbon dioxide. Now, this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere becomes very, very important to us, and we'll see why in a little bit. So 4 simple substances that contain carbon. In fact, I'm going to give you 5 examples, but in your book, I want you to just write 4. And one of those is graphite. And the graphite is carbon, but can be used to conduct electricity. It's the only non-metal that can conduct electricity, and that's because of the structure of graphite. Now, graphite that's been compressed over a really long period of time, and I'm talking millions of years, becomes a diamond. Now, diamond can't conduct electricity. In fact, it's a very good insulator. There's no way of electricity crossing a diamond, but it's made of the same elements, and in fact, the structure is just the thing that causes this. Anything that's living contains carbon-based molecules. Methane gas from your gas camping fires, also butane, any kind of gas, also petrol and diesel. These things all contain carbon. And of course, the food that we eat contains carbon because plant life contains carbon. All right, Mr. E, gotcha. Carbon's important. Brilliant. So, what's this carbon cycle about? Is it like I know the Olympics? The Olympic team rode carbon fiber bikes, right? It's because they're super light. Well, yes, they did, but that's not what a carbon cycle is. Carbon is constantly recycled in the environment and the atmosphere, and there's four processes that are involved in getting this to occur. The first one is photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is the process of a plant making its own food from the stuff in its environment. Respiration. Respiration is the process of using food and the air that we breathe to create energy, to give us the energy we need to live. Decomposition. When things die, they decompose and release the carbon back into the environment. And combustion. If you set fire to something, this is similar to respiration, in fact. You can use a carbon-based fuel and combine it with oxygen, a little bit of heat, and you will end up with fire. And this releases carbon dioxide. Okay, so here is your first task. Those of you at the college will have in your booklet this table and also some information cards on these four processes. I'm going to go through those processes, so if you want a little bit more information, or if you don't have a booklet, then keep watching and I will give you the information to fill in. So for each of these different processes, I want you to tell me, is carbon or carbon dioxide taken in or given out at this point? Name any organisms that are involved in this process, and then what actually happens to the carbon in each of these processes. Okay, so the first of our four processes is photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? Well, some of you will already know, but photosynthesis is a process by which plants make their own food. Now, if you're hungry, let's assume that we're not in a lockdown and it's easy to just go out and do whatever you like. If you're hungry, you can get up, you can go to your local shop and you can buy some food. But a plant can't do that. Also, if it's hungry, you can't just give it cake because plants can't eat cake. Poor plants, they can't eat cake. What do? Well, what they do is they make the sugar, the glucose, that actually makes cake tasty. And they do this by taking in sunlight and combining that with water and carbon dioxide, and they create food. So the plants take in carbon dioxide from the air. That's the important part of the carbon cycle, is it's absorbing the carbon dioxide from the air through the leaves. They use this photosynthesis to turn that carbon dioxide and the water and the sunlight into glucose, and that gives off oxygen. And that's important because without that, we don't have the oxygen that we need to breathe, and that would be a bit of a problem. This process takes place in the leaves of the plant. So if you have a plant and it's got lovely green leaves, then chances are in the sunlight it's photosynthesizing. And in fact, if you have plants that are underwater, you can actually see photosynthesis happening. It will create small bubbles which will then rise to the surface. Those bubbles are oxygen, but first it has to get carbon dioxide from somewhere. The glucose that it creates is its store of energy. Just like us, the plant needs to eat some food. It needs glucose. We need glucose to live, and I'll talk about that process in a moment. Now here is an equation. Carbon dioxide plus water plus light energy gives glucose and oxygen. Okay, so the glucose becomes its food and the oxygen goes off into the atmosphere to help us breathe. So here, carbon dioxide is being taken in from the surrounding atmosphere, and then it's being turned into glucose. And so that's what's happening to it. And this is happening in the leaves of plants, of the plant. And the next process that we need to worry ourselves about is respiration. And respiration is the process of converting the food that we've eaten, the glucose that we've consumed, and the oxygen which we breathe into energy. Now, some people confuse respiration because we have a respiratory system which involves breathing, People confuse respiration for just breathing, and in fact, the majority of it comes from the food that we eat, the glucose that we eat. Now, just because a plant has created the glucose doesn't mean the glucose isn't then used. The plants also respire, just like we do. And this is the process of taking glucose, combining that with oxygen, and this releases carbon dioxide, water, and energy. We can't make our own food like a plant can, so we have to feed on plants, or we feed on animals that have fed on plants. Now, the food that we've eaten, either the meat or the plant, contains carbon, and that provides the glucose. Now, the respiration, the glucose is broken down with the oxygen to release energy, and this happens in every single cell of our body. So respiration happens in all of the cells. Carbon is the building block for fats, proteins, carbohydrates, and anything that helps us grow. Without them, we just wouldn't exist. So this carbon is being broken down in our digestive system, and that glucose is being used for respiration, but also the carbon is being used with other proteins and fats and amino acids to build up our bodies. But our main source, or our only source of energy really, is the glucose used in respiration. Now, because our bodies are made of mostly carbon-based molecules, when we die, there's loads and loads of carbon locked into our bodies. Now, we get rid of some of these carbon-based molecules by defecating or urinating. So our waste contains carbon-based molecules, and we contain carbon-based molecules. So do the animals and the plants. Now this means that this carbon becomes locked inside of us, so it cannot be re-released back into the atmosphere. But when we die, what happens is our bodies decompose. Bacteria gets involved in eating our cells, breaking it down, and they also respire and give out carbon dioxide. So that carbon dioxide comes from the food that they are eating. And so this happens to our waste and our bodies when we die. So all of the carbon locked in the carbohydrates and proteins and fats that make up bodies of animals, plants, and humans all gets released after death. So this process relies on different fungi and different bacteria coming along and consuming the bodies. And this breaks down our matter and again releases that carbon dioxide again through respiration. So respiration is quite an important part of this cycle. Okay, the final process in the carbon cycle is combustion. Now this is the process of burning things, and that's taking a fuel, combining it with oxygen and heat, and causing it to burn. Now there are two types of combustion. There's complete combustion and incomplete combustion. Incomplete combustion will leave behind horrible sooty, carbony residue, and complete combustion burns everything, turns into carbon dioxide and water. Now, most people are a bit confused by the fact that combustion produces water, but it's almost the same process as respiration. You take a fuel, in our case, respiration's case, it's glucose, combine it with oxygen, and it gives off carbon dioxide and water and some energy in the form of heat. And we will take fossil fuels. So a fossil fuel is something that has been previously alive, such as a dinosaur or an ancient plant, and it's been buried, and before it can decompose properly, releasing all that carbon into the atmosphere through decomposition, ancient layers of pressure and rocks have caused so much pressure that the bodies have changed into oil or coal or natural gas. All of these things, the carbon has been unlocked in that process and has turned into what we call a fossil fuel. And we can always take wood, which is obviously a living form of carbon. And we burn these in power stations or in vehicles and engines and just in general fires. Now, don't forget that fires aren't just man-made. Fire is a natural process. Forest fires can be caused just through natural processes, but most of the fires on the planet are caused by humans doing something dim. This releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and a lot of water and a lot of heat. So the carbon from these fossils get released back into the atmosphere. Now, remember that the carbon that's been locked in these fossil fuels for millions of years gets released back into the atmosphere. Now, this is good for the carbon cycle, but remember, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. You get too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and it unbalances the environment. What will happen is the sunlight will get trapped on the earth and it will cause it to heat up. Also remember that these fossil fuels have been developed and made naturally over millions of years. Once we've used all of the oil and the coal and the natural gas, we're not going to get any more. There is no way of creating brand new fossil fuels without burying organic matter and leaving it under high pressure for millions of years. And that just isn't going to help us out. So we're burning through all of these fossil fuels. Now this will become an issue for us in later modules. All right, so your task should now look a little bit like this. Carbon or carbon dioxide taken in or given out. Photosynthesis, it's taken in by plants and it's made into glucose stored in the plants for later consumption. Now, the animals will then consume the carbon from the glucose and we will breathe it out because of respiration. We'll convert that glucose with oxygen to make carbon dioxide. Anything that's alive will do this process. So this is released as carbon dioxide. Now, also when we die, this carbon dioxide is also released by the consumption of our bodies by earthworms, bacteria, fungi, and all of that kind of stuff. Again, releases carbon dioxide. It's very similar to respiration, but it's the release of carbon locked into our bodies. Combustion is the direct release of carbon dioxide by burning something. Now, the organism mostly involved in this process is us. We like to burn things to make us warm or to make our vehicles propel themselves or to power our homes. Okay, so here is a graphical representation of the carbon cycle. We have carbon dioxide present in the air, and that's taken in by plants in the leaves through photosynthesis. That creates glucose, which is then consumed by an animal, and through respiration will then release carbon dioxide back into the air. The animal will eventually die. Once it does that, it will decompose, again releasing carbon dioxide into the air. Now, if it doesn't decompose, sometimes it will turn into a fossil fuel. Now, that fossil fuel is then burned through combustion, which then again releases carbon dioxide in the air. Your task is to take this diagram and fill in numbers 1 to 7 on your diagram using the following 7 descriptions. So each of these descriptions needs to be put in your diagram in the right place. Carbon dioxide is taken in by plants, turned into glucose. Then the carbon taken in by plants is then eaten by animals. Animal releases carbon dioxide. The plants die and the animals die, and their remains are fed on by microbes releasing carbon dioxide through respiration. Fossil fuels could be formed when plants and animals die. If they're not decomposed, but it turns into fossil fuels over millions of years, then they can be turned into a fuel, and those fuels can be burned by humans. Okay, task 3 is very similar. What I'd like you to do is use some of these keywords to try and identify each of these numbered arrows. Notice that some of those keywords may be used more than once. So here you go, process number 1, that's photosynthesis. The tree is taking in the carbon dioxide and photosynthesizing it, turning it into glucose. The herbivore is then digesting that glucose and then is releasing it by respiration. Number 3, the fox is then eating the little bunny and is digesting the carbon from the bunny. Process number 4 is death. The organisms are dying. And then in process number 5, we have decomposition. The microbes are feeding on the dead organisms. And then number 6, those organisms are being turned into fossil fuels. And then we have respiration is happening in all of these processes. We then mine the fossil fuels, dig them up, and then burn them through combustion. Finally then, we have these 4, even though it says 3 twice, we have these 4 progress check questions. Number 1, what is respiration? Number 2, what is photosynthesis? Number 3, what is decomposition? And number 4, what is combustion? Pause the video, fill those in, and come back. Okay, welcome back. Respiration is the process where organisms convert glucose and oxygen into carbon dioxide and water that releases energy. Photosynthesis is the opposite process where plants are converting carbon dioxide and water, taking in light energy and converting that into glucose and oxygen. Decomposition is the process of our bodies being rotted, broken down and consumed by microorganisms, and they again respire, giving off the carbon dioxide. And combustion is where a fuel is reacting with oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide and water through burning. Right, that's everything. Well done. Stay safe. I'll see you soon.